So, hello. One of the questions I get asked most often by people new to laser engraving and cutting is how do I adjust the size of a file that I've purchased or someone gave me for a three-dimensional object that has tabs and slot assembly. So the tabs and slot are really dependent on the thickness of the wood you're using. And if you get a file that's designed to work with 5mm wood and you've got 6mm wood, it's just not going to work. And so people cut them out and then they're frustrated that they didn't work. So today I'm just going to go over real quickly how to adjust these types of files to fit the exact thickness of the wood you're working with. And a lot of times, even if you bought a file that was for 1/4 inch wood, not all plywood is 0.25 inches. As a matter of fact, very little plywood is exactly 0.25 inches. So what you have to do is you have to measure the specific thickness of the wood you're using, and I highly recommend you spend 15 bucks and get a digital micrometer. You can find them on Amazon very easily. It makes doing this very quick and easy, so you can measure the thickness of your wood. And then what you have to do is come in and look at the file, understand what you're going to be making, and decide what do I need to change to make this file work. And there's two general approaches. The first approach is the simplest, and it's probably the quickest, is if you don't mind changing the size of all of the components and everything in the file, we can make one adjustment to the entire file to make it fit. The problem with that is everything's going to be rescaled. So if I do that for this file and this particular file, it's an enclosure for an electronics assembly. You can see this is the bottom piece right here. That's the top. We have the two long sides, a front and a back. And this file is designed so that the back there's going to be a fan that's going to bolt onto the back. So there's a hole cut out for the fan. There's mounting holes. And on the bottom there's a couple of holes made to mount a piece of equipment there. So changing the size would be a problem for this particular file, because then our holes aren't going to line up for the mounting bolts on the fan or whatnot. But I'll go through this just to show how you do it. If we didn't have the mounting holes, or we were going to draw the mounting holes in later, then this method would work just fine. So the first thing you have to do is measure to see what size wood this file is designed for. And so the way to do that is to find a slot on here where the wood's going to slide in. And that's going to tell you what size it was made for. So when you look at your file, you look at the sides, you can see, okay, on the sides and the fronts, there's these little holes, these little rectangular holes that are cut in the top on all four corners of the side pieces, both sides, the front and the back. And we have these little triangular pieces here with tabs. So it's obvious that these tabs, when you put your sides together, this tab is going to fit into that little slot, and the other tab is going to fit into the slot on the end. And it's going to give you a little shelf that the top is going to sit on top of, and then there's little screw holes that are going to screw down into these little triangular pieces. So these guys do double duty. They're going to stiffen up the assembly a little bit, make it nice and strong, and going to allow this lid to sit down flush with the tops of the sides. So it's going to give it a nice appearance. So we can tell then, since this tab right here is going to go into that slot. The height of that slot is the thickness of the wood. You're going to slide that right in there. So what we want to do is measure what is the height of that little rectangle right there. So the easiest way to do that in LightBurn, and I'll just tell you I'm using LightBurn 9.14 here. If you don't have LightBurn, I highly recommend you go download it. You can use it for a month for free, fully featured, everything that it does. It is head and shoulders better, in my opinion, than RDWorks. So I would highly recommend you go to the lightburnsoftware.com website and at least take a download for a few days and a week and play with it and see if you don't like it better than RDWorks. It works on any laser with a Rudia controller and a lot of others that use G-code. All right, but back to this. So we want to measure the height of this rectangle, find the height, the thickness of the wood the file is designed for. So if I try to select it, you see that whole side gets selected, and the reason for that is they were grouped together. So you can see up here it's grouped, so I'm going to ungroup it, and so now I can zoom in, I can select just that and take a look up here and see that the height is 0.18 inches. My units are in inches. I like working in inches. So we know that this was designed for wood about 0.18 inches. So that's like about a 5mm piece of wood. So we want to just, for this exercise, say, let's assume that we had a 1/4 inch wood that was exactly 0.25 inches. And we want to rescale this file to work with 1/4 inch wood. So here's where we get to use a little bit of math. And you thought you'd never use algebra again, but here it comes. So what we have is, so the wood that the tab that we're looking at here, that this file is designed for, 0.18, and we're going to use our X. That's going to be the scaling factor that we want to use to adjust, and we want it to be equal to 0.25 inches. So what this is telling us is right now it's 0.18. We want it to be 0.25, so there's some number we can multiply 0.18 times that'll get us to 0.25. So that's our scaling factor. X is what do we need to change in this file to get to 1/4 inch wood. So digging back into all of our algebra history from high school, we're going to say X is going to be equal to 0.25 divided by 0.18. And you do the math on that, and you're going to find out that X is going to be equal to, let's see, 1.388. So we have to scale this file by 1.388. It needs to be 1.388 times bigger. And that makes sense. So it's at 0.18 now. We need it to get bigger. So this number is going to be greater than 1, meaning we're making it larger. If we were going the other way from 0.25 down to 0.18, this number would be less than 1. We'd be multiplying it times something less than 1 to make it smaller. But in this case, we need to make it bigger, so it's going to be larger than 1. And LightBurn makes this really easy. So 1.388 is 138.8% larger. And again, that makes sense. It's going to be larger by 138%. So what we can do is if we select everything in this file, you can do Control-A to select everything also. Do this. We're going to scale everything here by 138%. So I want to lock my width and height. This is super important. Right now you see this little lock icon is open, which means if I were to scale the width, only the width would would change and the height would not, and our file would be really messed up. I want them to scale together so it stays in the same proportion. So I'm going to lock that. That's going to make these scale together. I'm going to change this width, or I can change the height, it doesn't matter which one. I'll change the height by 138.8%. So I'm telling LightBurn, make this file 138.8% larger than it is. I hit the enter key, everything's bigger. So if I were to come in now and take a look at that, it's 0.2498 height. So we got very close. We have a rounding error somewhere, but 0.2498 is good enough for what we're doing to work with the 0.25 wood. And in real world, you might want these slots to be just a tiny bit larger, maybe a thou larger than the wood thickness, so things fit in nice. But you don't want them to be too big. You want it to fit snugly. So sometimes you have to kind of just play, make a few test cuts of just a tab and a slot to see what works best for the wood you're using. But in this case, we were shooting for 0.25, so now we're at there. So this would work like this with 1/4 inch wood. The problem is now I have resized this bottom, so my holes, the distance between these two holes increased by 138%. So when I try to mount my, in this case this is an ozone generator mounts in here, the holes are going to be the wrong distance apart for the mounting holes in the ozone generator. So that's not going to work so great. And the same thing for my fan. The fan's not going to fit this cutout anymore, and the holes aren't going to line up for it. So if this was just a box I was building that didn't have holes in it for equipment to mount or fans to mount, then I would be fine. It's just a little bit larger than what we started with, but it's all going to fit together just fine, and it would be a perfectly acceptable box that fit on the size wood that we had. But for this case, I don't want to do it that way. I'm going to take the long road. So I want to, well, let's see, let's get everything back before we change the size. So that's back down to the 0.18 size that we started with. Let's get rid of that. So this is the way we started. So our slot now is still 0.18, but we want to adjust this to fit the 0.25. So what I can do is I can select. Oops, I move it. Tell you the undo buttons in LightBurn are so useful. So I can select the little slot there, and I can adjust this from 0.18, 0.25, and I just made a mistake. So what happened now was I still had the lock on, so the aspect ratios were locked. So when I made it taller to accept the thicker wood, it also made it wider. I didn't want to do that in this case, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to unlock it this time because I want my width to remain 0.292, because that's what fits this little tab right here. This little tab down here is 0.292 wide, so we're going to want it to fit in there. But the height needs to change to 0.25, so we'll do that. And LightBurn adjust it up and down, so it's still the center of that rectangle is exactly where we started from. It's just a little bit taller, equidistant from the middle. So that works out really well. And so then you can do that. You can select the other tabs, and you can go through and adjust all of these tabs so that they're going to be 0.25. This thicker wood then would fit just perfectly. I don't need to make any adjustments to these pieces that fit in there, because all I care about on them is this width of the tab, and that doesn't need to change. So it's only where you have the thickness of the wood going into this that you need to make the change. So that's why it's important to understand the box, whatever it is you're making, to understand where that thickness makes a difference on the drawing. So the other place where this thickness makes a difference is in all of this joinery, the tab and slot joinery to make the box. So you can see, so this is the bottom piece of the box. So the side is going to fit in to all of these tabs. All of these little notches down here on the bottom are going to plug into there. And what you want to have happen is the length of these notches, how far this distance is here, you want it to go all the way to the bottom of this piece of wood. So these, from this line, which is the bottom of the side, these notches need to stick down 0.25, which will be the thickness of the wood. So what you can do is you can come in here real quickly and just draw a rectangle and see what the depth of these notches is. And so that's 1.78. So you can see that. So that's fitting in about with the 0.18 that we were having. So they were a little bit short to begin with. But what we want to have happen is for these to extend down a full 1/4 inch. So we're going to make that height 0.25, make sure that our aspect ratio lock is turned off. It is. We're going to do that. So now this little rectangle that we're placing for sizing is the thickness of the wood. So I can select that and I'll move it up here. And let's just make it a different color so you can see it better. Get our selection pointer. So the red is what it used to be. The black is what I would like for it to be. So that's how much further down these need to extend. So how do I do that quickly? The easiest thing is to use a new feature that's been added in LightBurn that is going to allow us to do multi-node selection. So if I select my shape and I go into node edit mode, I'm not, let's see, I need to ungroup it first. You cannot use node editor if it's grouped, so I'm going to ungroup it so they're independent. Select it. I'm going to go back into node edit, and now you can see these little blue squares are the nodes, and it makes sense. So the line goes to here, there's a node, it drops down, comes across, up, down, all those nodes. So the nodes that I'm particularly interested in right now are these along the bottom. Those need to be dropped down some. So LightBurn now allows us to select a whole bunch of nodes at once and move them as one thing. So I'm still in node edit mode. You can see I've got the nodes shown here and they're all blue. So I can just draw a rectangle that captures all of those nodes on the bottom. You see they turn red, that lets me know they're selected. So now I can zoom in here so I can see it, and I can right click on that particular node. Whoops, I did not want to right click on that particular node. I lost my selection. Hold on, let me go back and get it again. Sorry about that. Let's say start over. We're going to get the select those nodes. Zoom in. position on there. I'm going to hold down the left mouse button and drag it down. So I'm holding down the left mouse button, I drag down. You want to make sure you don't go left or right, so you just come straight down. All of these nodes that were selected came down the same exact amount. So you can see now all of those along the bottom have been lowered. They're all 1/4 inch deep, so they're going to fit right to the bottom of the slots in this bottom panel, and that's going to work out perfect. So that works great. So let's get out of the node edit mode, get back to selection. That's our little dimensioning box we placed there. Let's drag it over here. We've got to do the same thing on this side. So we'll zoom in. And if you hold down the shift key when you're moving this around, it'll move in smaller increments. I'm sorry, you hold down the control key, shift key wasn't it? You hold down the control key and you can move it in smaller increments. So let's get that there. Let's just make it a little wider so that, so again, so now our width needs to be 0.25 because we're going sideways now. So this box, our little dimensioning box in black, is 0.25 wide, which is how far out we need these to extend. So this is going to extend into the side pieces of our box. So again, so what I'm going to do is I need to node edit all of these end pieces. So I'm going to select the shape. I'm going to enter the node edit. Our boxes turn blue again. So I'm going to draw a rectangle to select all of these that I want to move. Zoom in so I can see what's happening, and I'm just going to left click on that one. Oh, I did it again. Why did it do that? I want to, I've got to select it again. This is a whole lot easier to do when you're not thinking so much about what you're doing. So I need to select, come in, make sure it's on the node, drag the node out, let go. So now all of the side pieces are sticking out 1/4 inch. I can exit node edit mode. I can come down here and grab our little dimensioning box. So now this side and the bottom are correct, and I would just repeat that procedure for all of these sides. I'd have to do this side and then all the other sides that have these tabs on them. And then the last thing I would have to do is check that these tabs here are all going to be correct. And since the thickness of the wood is going into the width of that tab here, I'm going to have to adjust all of those. So I'm going to have to ungroup that. I'm going to select all of those, and I want that width, it's 0.18, I want that width to be 0.25. So those are all now 0.25, and then I can select these, and I want to make the width of those 0.25 as well. So now the thickness of this wood on the side pieces is going to fit right into those slots, and they're going to be deep enough to go to the bottom, so it's going to be a nice fit. And so once you've done all that, so now you can cut this out, and it's going to work with 0.25 wood, and you're done. So I hope that answers some questions about resizing tab and slot files to fit the particular thickness of the wood that you have, and that's really all there is to it. Thanks for watching.